Marijuana and other cannabinoid products are on the verge of becoming legal substances in Canada, or so we were led to believe following last fall's federal election. Regardless of your politics on pot, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made it pretty clear during this campaign that when elected, Canadians could expect the weed to be legalized. For many, legal marijuana is an exciting prospect, as nearly half of Canadians, some 44%, have admitted to having smoked marijuana at least once. For others, the recreational use of marijuana is not the big allure. Rather, it's the tax dollars that it's sure to generate. Some estimates peg the government take at $5 to $7 billion annually. Still, some have their reservations about pot, while millions are beginning to wonder what the holdup currently is. If and when marijuana is legalized, a debate is certainly brewing as to how it should be distributed, purchased, and consumed. Hey folks, thanks for joining us. I'm Kevin Chorney. I'm joined today by Keith Fagin, the founder, director, Alberta 420, Calgary 420. Sir, thanks very much for being here. It's great to meet you.
My pleasure, Kevin. I'm glad to be here.
Now, 420, what's the significance? For those of our viewers that don't know, let's talk a little bit about 420 culture. What is the significance of the number 420?
Well, 420s it used to be code back in the 70s for let's meet after school at 420 and we'll consume cannabis.
Okay.
So with ours, that's we have Alberta 420, but we tacked on cannabis community because this is several years ago. This is over a decade ago, and people still to this day don't know what 420 means. So that's why we tacked on the extra wording of cannabis community so people understand that don't know.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we got to talk a little bit about the history of prohibition of marijuana. I mean, obviously it's all over the news, legalization potentially around the corner, but let's back up a little bit. What was the big moment, I guess, in history that kind of led to marijuana being, prohibited 93 years ago?
Well, Justice Emily Murphy.
Okay, author, right?
Author, she's an author of The Black Candle under Janie Canuck. Yeah. In 1923, they brought about prohibition. They didn't study it, they didn't debate it. It just came up in Parliament, and by that time we had opium prohibition, which started in 1907. Yeah. So 1923, they brought it in, they attached it to a bill that they were debating, and they just brought it in like that. It was, again, no science, no evidence, no discussion at all.
So we roll forward a few years. I think the first seizure is like 1937, I was reading. Other than that, through the 40s and the 50s, essentially it's under the radar. We get into the 60s and 70s, and in Canada, and obviously a large part of the United States as well, cannabis consumption has basically breached into the mainstream.
Yes.
We move to the 80s, and Ronald Reagan shows up. Is that, do you think, in your mind, was that sort of the biggest roadblock to date for the progression of marijuana?
It certainly was a big one, but before him it was Nixon.
Okay.
The Schaefer Commission had come out in 1970s, the early 70s. Ledane came out in Canada in 1973, and they just ignored it. Nixon said, no way, it goes in the garbage, and we're starting the drug war. He was upset about the hippies and smoking out and protesting and the Vietnam War. Yeah. So that was his motivation. So that's where it started, and it carried on with Reagan and his Just Say No campaign, which made it all that much worse.
And Canada is more or less sort of followed suit with the United States. Is it fair to say that we've kind of taken our pot cues from the U.S. over the years?
Well, we were forced to. The U.S. has forced the UN Council that they have to keep prohibition going. And so it was basically the U.S. Back in 2003, Chrétien said, I'm going to decriminalize it. I'll have my $100 for a fine, a joint in one hand, and I'll pay my fine of $100. But the U.S. got quite upset. That was back when Bush was in place, and he was like Reagan and Nixon and very prohibitionist. So, he said, you start that, you start to decriminalize even, and we're going to start problems with the border. We're going to stop bringing your products into our country. So it scared them off. We were bullied into not decriminalizing or even legalizing.
So let's fast forward then. So here we are in the future. We're here in Calgary. I think it's probably fair to say that everybody knows somebody who consumes marijuana. Whether it be
certainly.
For medicinal purposes, recreational use. I can attest to knowing people in a plethora of professions, be it doctors, educators, whatnot, who have consumed the product. Is Calgary, obviously Vancouver is on the map when it comes to cannabis consumption.
Yes.
Where does Calgary fall into the realm of cannabis consumption in Canada?
Well, recently they came out with a study here on the laws across Canada not being enforced equally. Yeah. And I was actually surprised. Before we started, it was more Calgary would definitely have more arrests. But we were lower than Vancouver's number for arrests, which kind of shocked me. And this just came out this year. And so that was quite surprising. So it tells me that our efforts on education, on educating people with the science and the evidence, and not being that we're here, we're high, get used to it, smoke out crowd, which is what we've had. Vancouver has that, and what we've had for 30, 40 years now.
Yeah.
So we just take a different approach by it. I'm not here to consume. Yes, I do consume, and I've been consuming for over 40 years. But I have the science. I have the evidence. We have one-sheet pages that are easy, cheap to print off with the 2002 Senate committee, and where they said prohibition of cannabis was much more harmful than the product itself. It was a 600-plus page report, and here we are, in 2016, and we're still just finally starting to talk legalization. It's just...
So what's the biggest misconception then for detractors that look at those who consume marijuana and they think what? They think, I can't believe you're doing that because...
Well, it's that stigma that's always been attached to it, right, since day one, that it's the dirty old hippies that do it, you're lazy stoner, and that, I can understand some of the reasoning for that. There's different cannabis products. There's indica cannabis and there's sativa cannabis, where an indica is much more relaxing and it'll sort of give you that, what they call couch lock. You want to sit down and relax, watch a little TV, maybe a few munchies, where on the sativa end, you want to be more active, more creative. Like if I want to get some brownie points with the wife when she's out and about doing her thing, I'd consume some sativa and I run around the house cleaning, and I got a big smile on my house, my face cleaning house. So there's two big different ones, but the indica is so much easier and faster to grow and produces much more weight. So that your commercial guys, your black market guys, are going to produce the indicas.
So that's what's commonly consumed across Canada for the most part?
Mostly, yes. Okay. Personally, I do like sativas. Indica at night before I go to bed to relax me and get rid of my joint pain and my leg pain. And then I can sleep. I can sleep throughout the night. And then, in the next day, I got to work, or I've got things to do. I've got to get stuff done, or I've got to write an article or whatever. I'll consume sativa. It's more creative. It's more motivational. It makes you want to do things and makes you think clear. It sees things you normally wouldn't see if you didn't consume the sativa cannabis.
Interesting. It sounds like there's actually a lot more to marijuana than I think people realize. I want to touch on this in a little bit more, but we are going to check in with our rant pack briefly. First, folks, check it out.
Personally, I don't really care that the Liberals promised to legalize marijuana. To me, that's not really an election issue. What I do think is a big problem is the fact that people are incarcerated for the use of this drug and many other drugs that, granted, it hurts the individuals who are using them in the long term, but I would say that with marijuana, that isn't the case. But I think that from what I understand, the reason why they haven't done it has to do with like free trade agreements, and it puts creates a lot of extra problems for them that they didn't anticipate in the meantime. So I think, was it a false promise? Probably. I think he meant it. I think he honestly meant what he said. And by him, I mean Justin Trudeau. But at the same time, I feel that the government definitely needs to get their act together and speed up this process, because I think it's just the science doesn't back up the reason to criminalize it.
All right, obviously, Jay touched on a lot there. What I want to kind of touch on between the two of us now would be incarceration. I mean, I hear it a lot that there's people that are in prison for consuming what's essentially a weed, a herb, a natural substance.
Right.
At the end of the day, though, I mean, they're still breaking the law, are they not? I mean, is it defendable?
Well, they are breaking the law. There's no doubt about it. But I do agree with Jay that it's causing a lot of harm. And where he mentions the treaties, the UN treaties, and that, there is an issue there where criminalizing and decriminalizing is a bit of an issue. But a lot of these treaties have been ignored, not just for cannabis, for other issues in United States that are legalizing cannabis. They're ignoring those treaties. So it's not that much of a stick in the mud for us, the UN treaties. It's there, but it won't stop. It shouldn't stop Justin Trudeau and his government from legalizing.
If one of the biggest consumers on the planet, being the United States, has sort of put those treaties out the back door, then obviously they've lost a lot of traction. I kind of see where you're going with that. Locally, though, how, in your opinion, how is the Calgary Police Service treated marijuana groups within Calgary. Obviously, it was in the news lately. Dana Larson was arrested for handing out some seeds. Generally speaking, though, I mean, how have you found the CPS is dealing with marijuana consumption?
Well, the CPS and City Hall have been very much against it. You know, they told me back in the day when we were having 420 rallies and global marijuana march rallies that this is not going to happen in our city. We're going to arrest you. We're going to put you in prison. We're going to ticket you. We're going to stop you at all costs. And the first 420, and just over almost 10 years ago, in 2006, they had a huge police presence when we showed up at the Thompson's Park, which is at 17th Avenue and 8th Street Southwest. We like to call it 420 Park, and we always have. So they had a huge presence there, and they ended up ticketing us that we were disturbing the public peace of the park, right? My argument was they were disturbing the public peace of the park more than anybody else. They had a huge group of police at one end, and all the park users were at the far end, away from the police. So when we showed up and they gave us that ticket, we went to court, and our lawyer within 30 seconds had it tossed out. He brought up the sergeant and asked him some questions about it, and why did you ignore these other people consuming? And
so people are consuming. I mean, I can sort of sympathize with the police. That's basically a rock in a hard place, right? I mean,
it is.
You have to be able to empathize with the position that they're in, I would think. The recent, though, arrest of Dana Larson, is that just a publicity thing? What's behind all that? That's essentially, I guess that's just the police doing their job.
Well, if you look at Kelowna, Edmonton, Regina, Saskatoon, where Dana's been now so far, not one police officer in sight. You know, and we've educated the police, and they've, over the years, it took time. It took, you know, as we're doing our events, they started to back off a little more and a little more. Like last year at 420, they were across the street. And some people were consuming cannabis, and we know that, and I've worked with the police all these years, and we know that some people are going to consume cannabis. I'm going to stand up there and say, yes, I am a cannabis consumer, but no, I'm not going to consume cannabis publicly here. It's just, you know, it's
a respect thing. It's a two-way street.
Perfect, right? Exactly.
And I think that, like any, you know, big discussion where there's obviously, you know, some polarizing opinions, communication is clearly key.
Yes.
And I would argue, I mean, we've had some CPS members on this program in the past. Pretty good bunch. I think the key with the CPS is communication.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like your group is actually fairly in tune with that point of view.
Well, yeah, it was the police when the city was trying to stop us, and I told the police it's a Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You know, we're allowed to peacefully assemble. Well, then we did the Global Marijuana March a week later in 2006, a week and a half later, and there's the police with their hand out, shaking my hand. And my goal was safety first. Peaceful next.
That's a bit of a mixed message as well, right?
Well, it is. It is, certainly. But I want people to be safe and come back the next time. So the police would block the roadways. We'd stay on the sidewalks. We wouldn't block the roads. But they would block us so we could cross, you know, intersections and that. And they would block the traffic for us. So that was the main goal, was to stay safe. And we've worked with so many of them, and they've been very professional. And
well, that's good.
I wasn't there that night. Dana got arrested, unfortunately. My wife was there videotaping. She records all our events always for us.
Smart.
And it is, you know, you need to do that. And unfortunately, I just wasn't able to be there and maybe try to help calm down that crowd a little bit, because they were pretty upset. And I was definitely, when I seen that, it was very concerning. And
people get fired up. Fair enough.
They do, yes.
Switching gears a little bit, though. I mean, okay, there's essentially two schools of thought when it comes to pot. There's decriminalization, and then there's full-out legalization.
Right.
What's the big difference between the two for our viewers, and which would you prefer to see?
Well, first of all, decriminalization, I feel, is more like net widening. And what I mean by that is decriminalizing, you're going to get a fine for that pot, like John Chrétien said back in the day, that he'd have his $100 in his joint and he'd pay his fine. Well, that's going to be, you know, today the police officers use a lot of discretion, right? Where a kid's done something wrong, a youth or even an older person's done something wrong, and they'll turn a blind eye to the cannabis. They'll take it away from you. They'll destroy it in front of you, usually crush it on the ground and get it all busted up and unusable. But they won't charge you because it does give you a criminal record. But with decriminalization, now they're going to be much more prone to, I just got to fire off a ticket, and they're not going to get a criminal record, right? So now they're going to be much more quicker to fire off that $100 ticket or whatever it could be. You know, we don't know what that could be. But
what about the big one for me is the tax dollars. Decriminalization, you know, the government's taking in zero tax. What's the point of that? I mean, if we're going to do this, let's do this. Let's go full legalization. I mean, for example, Colorado Colorado last year, 2015, they cleared over $100 million in tax revenue.
That's right. Yeah.
Now there's talk in Canada, numbers are estimating I think it was actually $5 to $7 billion in revenue per annum in Canada. I mean, this is going to rival alcohol tax intake. I mean, this has to be a big part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
So then why is it that we still see people that are, well, let's go with the decriminalization rather than the full-out legalization? What am I missing here?
Well, they're not getting the science, they're not getting the evidence, right? They're still relying or being educated by some of that stigma, and it's still there, you know, where some police officers are very against it, and they will say so. The RCMP officer in the Allard court case here that was just decided in February 24th, the judge says that I can't take his evidence. It's biased, it's not backed by science, so I'm not going to listen to him. So there are on both sides, right? There's police officers that consume and know the truth. There's police officers that don't consume and know the truth. But there's still some that, you know, holding on to that old reefer madness. And there's always going to be that way. I don't care if you legalize it or what you do with it. There's still going to be people against it, and for their own reasons, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. I guess that's how it goes, right?
It is.
Many facets of society, frankly.
Absolutely.
Folks, we're going to check in with our rant pack once again. Stay with us.
Okay, I'm going to try and pack this all in because this is a bit of an area of expertise. We should, as a country, legalize all of it. There's drug use is not a criminal offense. It just isn't. Neither is addiction. That's a health problem. In Colorado, in the last 2 years where it's been legalized, the first year there was $30 million of extra money in Colorado. That's a lot of tax money. That's one state. The tax benefits to legalize marijuana are huge. There is so much less concern health-wise with marijuana than there is alcohol. I could quote you statistics. I wish I had time. What else can I tell you? It's just legalize it. It's ridiculous. This charging and convicting people and ruining their lives over a thing that grows by the side of the road with a background in racism, it is ridiculous. It has to stop. It's many years past. There are studies and studies and studies. It's time to just do it.